So, Mr. President, over the course of the evening, I may look for an opportunity to speak again. But I'm telling the President that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid.
And yet today we are here before the Senate because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Well, this is contrary to everything our country was founded upon. One person is not allowed to raise taxes. The Constitution forbids it.
The Patrol Council gave this statement. The Border Patrol Act of 2024 will give the United States Border Patrol agents authorities codified in law that we have not had in the past. While not perfect, and I'll agree with him on that, the Border Patrol Act of 2024 is a step in the right direction, and it is far better than the current status quo. Currently, we have a Republican 2-vote majority in the House of Representatives and a Democrat 1-vote majority in the United States Senate. It doesn't get much closer than that to being equally divided in two bodies. But that means if we're going to solve something, we have to sit down together and solve it. That's how it works when you make law. You can do press conferences without the other side, but you can't make law without the other side in the United States Senate. So we have to sit down and work things out.
Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. And that's bad by itself. But you know what's worse? It's when you employ tactics that intentionally terrorize the population. Now, Senator Shaheen talked about the power grid. I was in that meeting. She was talking about, let's talk about systematically how this mind works, the mind of Vladimir Putin, the leadership of Russia. It's very cold in Ukraine, very, very cold in the wintertime. And they have tried to systematically deny them heat over the winter to freeze them out. They've had to spend millions of dollars hardening substations just to prevent families, hospitals, critical businesses, first responders from having power. That's how this man thinks. But that's not bad enough. Shortly after they invaded Ukraine and they got the surprise of their life that the Ukrainian people were willing to fight and die for their country, and they've done it in a way that Putin could not have possibly imagined. Putin should be embarrassed. A so-called world power got repulsed by what now is the largest army in Europe, standing army. It wasn't when the invasion occurred. And just with our help through materials, they've held off Russia for 3 years. Putin probably understood at some point that he wasn't going to be able to win it through conventional tactics, so what does he go to? Terrorist tactics, the same sort of tactics he uses in Africa with mercenaries, terrorizing populations, indiscriminately killing people. That is what Vladimir Putin does every single day, 24/7, 365, around the globe.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady. When I ran for Congress in 2018, the debt was $21 trillion. I was just texting with my son back home in Austin, who I haven't seen in quite a long time because I'm here trying to fight for him. When I got through cancer about 12 years ago, I made my promise to my kids that I would do everything I can to save this country. And what we're doing right now is to continue to double down on the things that are destroying the republic. We are going to increase the debt ceiling, not just $4 trillion, that's false. We have spent $4.7 trillion in additional debt in the last 19 months. We're going to increase the debt by $5 trillion. That's what's going to happen right here by Republicans, increasing the debt $5 trillion. And what are you doing in the same bill? $110 billion unpaid for, because you never have any ounce of self-respect to go out and campaign saying you're going to balance the budget, and then you come in here and pass $110 billion unpaid for. On top of the $200 billion you did for WEP, you guys won't agree with that, But the fact of the matter is, $330 billion. Congratulations, you've added to the debt since you were given the majority again on November 5th. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. Yes, I think this bill is better than it was yesterday on certain respects, but to take this bill yesterday and congratulate yourself because it's shorter in pages, but increases the debt by $5 trillion is asinine. And that's precisely what Republicans are doing. I am absolutely sickened by a party that campaigns on fiscal responsibility and has the temerity to go forward to the American people and say, you think this is fiscally responsible. It is absolutely ridiculous. It also turns off PAYGO. It turns off the $1.7 trillion in automatic cuts under PAYGO. Because this side of the aisle is profoundly unserious about actually reducing deficits, just as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are profoundly unserious about reducing deficits. The entire body has been racking up debt for my entire life. $36 trillion, $1 trillion of interest. We rack up $1 trillion every 100 days. Now, what are we going to do about it? We're going to run around and talk about cutting taxes, but not doing what's necessary to cut the spending along with the cut taxes. My other side of the aisle, my colleagues will say, oh no, we got to increase taxes, but won't do anything to cut spending. And so here we sit in the same mess. And I got to be honest, I want to remind people, this is Article 1.
Let me just say this. I've listened to a lot of my colleagues in the last several days, as well I should, and I've listened for months. Some people legitimately want more time to read the bill. I have to tell you, it's 370 pages. It's incredibly technical, and I've had several colleagues said, I've started reading it, and it makes my head hurt to read it, because immigration law is very complicated. So they're going through it, and they've said, hey, I'm interested in supporting this. I just need more time. Some of those folks are going to vote no today because they legitimately just need more time. I completely understand that. There are some folks that are voting no today because they have policy differences on the bill. We have asylum officers that are empowered to make decisions. They want immigration judges to make it. Okay, well, that's a policy difference on it. Some folks don't like that we have visas that are in this. That increases legal immigration, not illegal, legal immigration in the country. There's some folks that don't want any immigration of any type. Well, fine, we can have that policy difference. I don't mind legal immigration. I just don't want illegal immigration. Some of them may have policy differences. Some of them have been very clear with me. They have political differences with the bill. They say it's the wrong time to solve the problem, or let the presidential election solve this problem. In fact, I had a popular commentator 4 weeks ago that I talked to that told me flat out, before they knew any of the contents of the bill, nothing was out at that point, that told me flat out, if you try to move a bill that solves the border crisis during this presidential year, I will do whatever I can to destroy you, because I do not want you to solve this during the presidential election. By the way, they have been faithful to their promise and have done everything they can to destroy me in the past several weeks. There are other folks that read the Facebook posts and the Twitter posts and saw different facts that they thought might be true. But I personally told them over and over again, they're false. And it's been hard to overcome. For some reason, we still believe everything we read on the internet, and it's been hard to be able to break through. A few weeks ago, I posted one of my favorite quotes from Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who's a preacher from England in the 1850s, where he once said, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets its boots on. And it couldn't have proved to be more true in this. Madam President, I'm going to vote yes to be able to move on to this bill. So we need a change in the law. I understand we have differences, but we've got to sit down together, figure out how we're going to solve problems, because the American people sent us here to do that. I have two staff members named Sarah Seitz and Jacob Stubbs who've worked their tail off for 4 months. They gave up Thanksgiving, they gave up Christmas, they gave up New Year's to work on this. They're remarkable leaders. But it's not just about the time they gave up and the wisdom that they have as leaders. Their focus on that was to solve a problem that at the end of this day may still be a problem unsolved. And tomorrow we'll probably have 6,500 people illegally cross our border, just like is what's happening right now today. 6,500 people. Americans want that stopped. So let's actually sit down and figure out how we're going to stop it together.
Taxation without representation is tyranny, bellowed James Otis. In the days and weeks and years leading up to the American Revolution, this became the rallying cry of American patriots. No taxation without representation. The American patriots thought that a distant parliament in England, where they had no representation, had no right to tax them. This was the rallying cry, no taxation without representation. Our founding fathers believed so strongly in this, they embodied it in our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't allow any one man or woman to raise taxes. It must be the body of Congress. Now, this wasn't new. This was part of maybe a 1,000-year tradition from Magna Carta on. In Magna Carta, it is stated, no taxation without the common council of the realm. Even at that time, they were chafing at one man, the king, determining the taxes for the land. 100 years before our Revolutionary War, in the English Civil War, there was a debate over parliamentary supremacy versus supremacy of the king. They did not want to pay taxes that weren't approved by the Parliament. In 1683, the New York Charter on Liberties, the beginning charter for the colony of New York, stated, no taxation without representation. After this English Civil War, the English Bill of Rights embodied no taxation without the consent of Parliament. This principle was long-standing. It was non-negotiable. This was what sparked the revolution. And yet today we are here before the Senate because one person in our country wishes to raise taxes. Well, this is contrary to everything our country was founded upon. One person is not allowed to raise taxes. The Constitution forbids it. The Constitution was so concerned with the power of taxes, which some have said the power of taxes is the power to destroy. But our founding fathers were so concerned with this that they said, no, the president will not have the power to legislate. The president will not have the power to tax. Only Congress will be able to tax the people, and only by originating tax bills in the House. It was that specific. They were so mortified. They were so worried by having a monarchy. They were so worried about having all the power gravitate to the executive that they said we must split the powers. They based a lot of their thinkings on Montesquieu. Montesquieu wrote in the 1740s, 40, 50 years before our Constitution, Montesquieu wrote that when the legislative and executive powers are united in one, there can be no liberty. This is something that our founding fathers took to heart. They said, we must separate the powers. We must at all costs limit the power of the presidency. This isn't about political party. I voted for and supported President Trump, but I don't support the rule of one person. We are set, the president is set to have a 25% tax on goods coming from Canada and Mexico. This is a tax, plain and simple, on the American people. But one person can't do that. Our founding fathers said, no, that would be illegal for one person to raise taxes. It has to come to Congress. It has to originate in the House. This has gone on for 200 and some odd years. You can't simply declare an emergency and say, well, the constitutional republic was great, but gosh, we've got an emergency. Our times are dire. The Supreme Court has repeatedly said there are no exemptions for emergency. There was no exemption for a pandemic. There is no exemption for emergencies. The taxation clause stands. It's an important part of the Constitution. Taxes must originate in the House. They must be voted on in Congress. No one man can raise taxes on the people. They are set to do this through a process in which an emergency has been declared. But realize this, one person declares an emergency, the president, and even if we are successful, which I think we will be successful here today, a majority will vote to say this is wrong-headed and the emergency should end. We'd have to go to the House. But even if we were successful in the House, the president would veto it. It would take a two-thirds vote in order to stop an emergency. That's such a burden that we need to consider reforming the emergency powers and reversing this. I think a president can have times that there are emergencies, and the president can declare emergency, but it should last 30 days at most. At the end of 30 days, the emergency would be brought to the people's house, the House of Representatives and the senators, and we would vote whether to affirm or uphold an emergency. Right now, the pretense of this emergency is fentanyl. I don't discount fentanyl. I know families who have lost kids to fentanyl. But there's more fentanyl going from the United States into Canada than there is coming from Canada into the United States. There is no emergency. The Canadians have actually been cooperative with us and said they will try to do even more. But the problem isn't in Canada. Even if the problem is valid, even if that is something that we all agree on, you can't have a country ruled by emergency. You can't have a country without a separation of powers, without checks and balances. Madison put it this way. Madison said that we would pit ambition against ambition, that all men, and frankly all women, are motivated by self-interest and the self-accumulation or aggrandizement of power. And so we would limit their power by pitting ambition against ambition. We would give some of the power to the House, some of the power to the Senate, some to the president. There would be checks and balances and a jostling for power, but we would check and balance each other. Part of the problem we face today with this emergency, though, is that Congress has abdicated their power. Not just recently, not just for this president. This is a bipartisan problem. I am a Republican. I am a supporter of Donald Trump. But this is a bipartisan problem. I don't care if the president is a Republican or a Democrat. I don't want to live under emergency rule. I don't want to live where my representatives cannot speak for me and have a check and balance on power. One person can make a mistake. And guess what? Tariffs are a terrible mistake. They don't work. They will lead to higher prices. They are a tax, and they have historically been bad for our economy. But even if this were something that was magic and was going to be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I wouldn't want to live under emergency rule. I would want to live in a constitutional republic where there are checks and balances against the excesses of both sides, right or left. If one person rules, that person could make a horrible mistake. On things so important as war, it's the same thing. We don't want a president just to go to war because a president might get angry with some country or have a vendetta. We're supposed to vote. That's why declaration of war. War originates also in Congress. But we have lost so many of these things, and so much of this, it's Congress's fault for giving it. Over the last 70 years, there's probably a dozen pieces of legislation where Congress said to the president, here, take this power. Create emergencies, put on tariffs, negotiate for us because we're too feeble-minded to do it ourselves. But the thing is, the Constitution doesn't let us give our power away. There's something called the non-delegation clause, and it says that we're not allowed to give power away. We can't just say, here, Mr. President, take it. In this particular case, it's even worse. The rule of law, the IEPA is the acronym for it, has never been used for tariffs before and doesn't mention the word tariff. So this isn't something that was targeted in times of need. The president can have the power to put on tariffs. Never says that. This will be an extraordinary use of something never intended to be a way to have unilateral, one single person invoke a tax on the people. With regard to tariffs, let's be very clear. Tariffs are simply taxes. Tariffs don't punish foreign governments, they punish American families. When we tax imports, we raise the price of everything, from groceries to smartphones to washing machines to prescription drugs. Every dollar collected in tariff revenue comes straight out of the pockets of American consumers. Conservatives used to understand that tariffs are taxes on the American people. Conservatives used to be uniformly opposed to raising taxes because we wanted the private marketplace, the private individuals, to keep more of their income, so we were always for lower taxes. And yet now the mantra that's coming is we want higher taxes. What happened? Did we all of a sudden give up all the things we used to believe in as conservatives? I, for one, haven't. I still think more taxes is bad for the economy. More money taking out of the productive sector, the private sector, and giving to the government is a mistake. To those who still call themselves conservatives but now support tariffs, let me remind them that Milton Friedman said, "Tariffs raise prices to consumers and waste our resources." To those who still have a fond memory of Ronald Reagan on my side, Ronald Reagan said, "Protectionism costs consumers billions of dollars, damages the overall economy, and destroys jobs." Ronald Reagan's vision for America can be seen in our trading relationships with Canada. In 1986, President Reagan said, "Our trade policy rests firmly on the foundation of free and open markets." I recognize the inescapable conclusion that all history has taught: the freer the flow of world trade, the stronger the tides of human progress and peace among nations. And it's absolutely true. If you look at a chart or a graph of world trade over the last 70 years, it's gone like this. We've been trading more with each other. If you look at a world map of prosperity, it's the same curve. It's a hockey stick. It's going up exponentially. If you look at a curve of poverty, 100,000 people are escaping poverty every day around the world, and it's because of international trade. Trade is good, not bad. Think about it. If you buy something, you are trading. If you go to the store and you buy a smartphone and you give them $1,000, you want that smartphone and you don't lose. Doesn't matter where the money went, you got your smartphone. You only give money to somebody for something if you want it. If it's a voluntary trade, it's always equal.
Mr. President, I spent most of my career in management consulting, managing large, complex enterprise projects, multi-year, thousands of hours, a lot of complexity that take people, process, and technology to make it work. I learned a lot in that career. And I was able to go to the legislature and take that mindset as a member of the minority for 2 terms. And then we got a majority in 2010. And I found myself being the Speaker of the House. Mr. President, we were in the middle of the financial crisis. When I got sworn in January of 2011, North Carolina had a $2 billion shortfall on a $20 billion general revenue fund. And I had 6 months to balance that budget. Well, Mr. President, we did something that had not been done in North Carolina. We took the time to understand every aspect and every dollar that was being spent in government. We determined how to cut government in a way that was sustainable. We cut 12% from the university system budget. Not the rate of growth, but the actual spending. And I had some people say that it was going to be disruptive and the University of North Carolina would never be the same again. But, Mr. President, we did it in a way that was instructed by the operations of the university system. And we did it in a way in concert with the chancellors. And you know what happened, Mr. President? We actually balanced the budget. We did do those cuts. And the last time I checked, the North Carolina university system is still considered one of the greatest systems in the United States of America. Why do I use that example? Because the Medicaid proposal in this bill bears no resemblance to that kind of discipline and due diligence. It has no insights into how these provider tax cuts are going to be absorbed without harming people on Medicare. And even worse, most of my colleagues do not even understand on either side of the aisle the interplay of state-directed payments and the devastating consequences of the funding flows that are going to be before us. Mr. President, here's how I figured out the impact in North Carolina. I used to be Speaker of the House, and I like the Speaker and have a good relationship with the Speaker and the President Pro Tem, so I called them up. And I had my staff ask them if they would do an economic impact assessment on what this proposed bill would do to the Medicaid program in North Carolina. But I didn't want just the view of the Republican partisan staff that reports to the Speaker and the President Pro Tem on how they're going to absorb this bill. I decided to go to Josh Stein, the governor, and I went to his Democrat staff for Medicaid. I asked them to prepare an estimate, independent of the estimate that I had done with fiscal research. But I took a step further, Mr. President. I went to the Hospital Association. I asked 3 different independent groups, a partisan Democrat group, a partisan Republican group of experts, and a nonpartisan group of the Hospital Association to develop an impact assessment independent, not talking, not sharing, reporting to me. And what I found is the best case scenario is about a $26 billion cut. Now, we've got a delay, so it may be 2 years, it may be 1 year. All it does is make that $26 billion happen in year 1 or year 12, but the impact is the same, Mr. President, and it's indisputable. Now, when I actually presented this report that you can find on my website, I had people in the administration say, "You're all wet, you don't know what you're doing." I said, well, why don't we assemble a series of meetings? We're going to provide you our analytics. You go through it, tear it apart. I told about Mehmet Oz, who I consider to be one of the most capable people in the Trump administration. He's a brilliant man, and I'd encourage my Democrat colleagues to talk to him. He knows his stuff, and he's very focused on getting efficiencies out of CMS. So we had 3 different conference calls with CMS, with Oz on the phone and on the video, and me on the video. And I said this, guys, I would love nothing more than you to prove me wrong. I would love nothing more for you to tell me it's not $26 billion or $30 billion, that it's $2.6 billion or $2 billion or $200 million. But after 3 different attempts for them to discredit our estimates, the day before yesterday, they admitted that we were right, that between the state-directed payments and the cuts scheduled in this bill, there's a reduction of state-directed payments. And then there's the reduction of the provider tax. They can't find a hole in my estimate. So what they told me is that, yeah, it's rough, but North Carolina's used the system. They're going to have to make it work. All right. So what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys? I think when the White House, senators advising the president are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. And you know the last time I saw a promise broken around health care, with respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, it's when somebody said, if you like your health care, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We found out that wasn't true. That made me the second Republican Speaker of the House since the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, because we betrayed the promise to the American people. 2 years later, 3 years later, it actually made me a U.S. Senator, because in 2010, it had just been proposed. And just anticipation of what was going to happen was enough to have a sea change election that swept Republicans into the majority for the second time in 100 years. Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room when I was there with finance, where he said we can go after waste, fraud, and abuse on any programs. Now, those amateurs that are advising him, not Dr. Oz, I'm talking about White House healthcare experts, refused to tell him that those instructions that were to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse all of a sudden eliminates a government program that's called the provider tax. We have morphed a legal construct that admittedly has been abused and should be eliminated into waste, fraud, and abuse. Money laundering. Read the code. Look at how long it's been there. I was Speaker of the House. I refused to do it. When I left North Carolina, I said, we're not going to do a provider tax. I left it at 2.5%. Now it's 6%. Mistake on the part of the leadership. And frankly, I know my friends are probably going to think I'm a little bit crazy here, but I actually passed a law that made it illegal to expand Medicaid. Why did I do that? Because I was convinced someday we would be here. And I would have rather found a way to get more people on Medicaid at the standard FMAP than having this 90-10 match and watching it disappear and taking away desperately needed health care. So, Mr. President, over the course of the evening, I may look for an opportunity to speak again. But I'm telling the President that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. I love the work requirement. I love the other reforms in this bill. They are necessary, and I appreciate the leadership of the House for putting it in there. In fact, I like the work of the House so much that I wouldn't be having to do this speech if we simply started with the House mark. I've talked with my colleagues in North Carolina. I know that we can do that, and I believe that we can make sure that we do not break the promise of Donald J. Trump that he's made to the people who are on Medicaid today, Mr. President. But what we're doing, because we've got a view on an artificial deadline on July 4th that means nothing but another date and time, we could take the time to get this right if we lay down the House mark of the Medicaid bill and fix it. And I know that my friend and colleague from New Hampshire, I jumped in front of her, so I'm only going to take another minute or two. But, Mr. President, we owe it to the states to do the work to understand how these proposals affect them. How hard is that? I did it. How hard is it? How hard is it to sit down and ask the Medicaid office, ask the legislative staff, ask the Independent Hospital Association what the impact is? If there's no negative impact, what's wrong with daylight? What's wrong with actually understanding what this bill does? Mr. President, I know what it does because I spent a career implementing complex systems, and then I had the privilege of being Speaker of the House, and I implemented them in a government setting. And since I've been here, I've focused on bills and watched their implementation from the cradle until they're fully implemented. Mr. President, we owe it to the American people, and I owe it to the people of North Carolina to withhold my affirmative vote until it's demonstrated to me that we've done our homework. We're going to make sure that we fulfill the promise, and then I can feel good about a bill that I'm willing to vote for. But until that time, I will be withholding my vote. I want to thank Senator Shaheen for actually a long-term friendship and vision that she had back in 2018 when she came to me and wanted to reconstitute the Senate NATO Observer Group. It could not have been a better time for us to pay more attention to this very important alliance. But it's also right now today, 4 days away from the 3-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, very important to talk about the nature of Vladimir Putin and the tactics that they use to terrorize populations. President Putin in October, prior to the invasion in February, said that he was sending troops to an area to do a training exercise. While we were getting intelligence that it looked like more than that, he was already lying to the world by saying, we're just going to train up our soldiers a little bit more. And then after the first part of the year, going into January, he said, well, we're doing the training exercise. It just coincidentally happens to be along the Ukrainian border, but it's just a training exercise. And then he creates any number of pretexts to then talk about how provocative Ukraine is, operating a democracy within their borders, and he creates the pretext for a special military operation, invading Ukraine, trying to finish what he started when he invaded Crimea back in 2014. He decides to allow, under orders, Russian military to go into a community of about 200,000 people. That's roughly the size of the community I live in, North Carolina, just north of Charlotte. Imagine what they're doing. They are going through the city and indiscriminately, when somebody walks past them, shooting them, sometimes with .50 caliber weapons and tank armor, murdering them, stacking them up in mass graves. I went to this site. I saw it firsthand. This is how he's trying to win the war, because he can't win the hearts and minds of Ukrainian people. He's destroyed the hopes and dreams of anybody that's lived in the Soviet era. And he wants that to reemerge. And he's willing to do anything, including terrorizing innocent civilians, to break their will. But thank God the Ukrainian people are the brave people that they are, because this hardened them. This made them go onto a battlefield and live in trenches 24 hours a day, repulsing the Russian invasion. There is no moral person on this planet who can consider Putin to have a legitimate reason to effect this sort of carnage. And I saw it firsthand. And I will never be able to forget it. And what the American people and the world population will never be able to forget either is the aftermath of appeasing Vladimir Putin. Ladies and gentlemen, China is already helping Russia. North Korea has sent thousands of troops, and North Korea don't really care about life. They've allowed 4,000 to 5,000 of their soldiers die on the battlefield within 6 weeks of getting on the ground. They are throwing body after body after body, trying to kill and break the will of the Ukrainian people. And it's just unacceptable. So, look, I'm a Republican. I support President Trump, and I believe that most of his policies on national security are right. I believe his instincts are pretty good. But what I'm telling you, whoever believes that there is any space for Vladimir Putin in the future of a stable globe better go to Ukraine. They better go to Europe. They better invest the time to understand that this man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. And it will be a cancer that spreads into the South China Sea, into Taiwan, and metastasizes across the globe. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and a man responsible for ordering the systematic torture, kidnapping, and rape of innocent civilians, believe me, because the evidence is mile high. So, for those of us who have invested the time to understand this, believe me when I tell you this is important to every single one of you. If you believe that Ukraine is a country an ocean away and not relevant to our national security, think again. The world is small. The world is watching. The strength of our alliances are on the line, and the future of democracy in the world is on the line if we do anything less than defeat Vladimir Putin.